talk to. So the idea is to look at like, hey, how frequently do people deploy and what programming languages are they using? And can we find correlations? For example, I expect to see that people programming in C deploy less often than people programming in JavaScript. Not sure, but if that's the case, you can write an article about that. Basically, programming languages are a popular subject. So any correlation that you can find with programming languages and anything like how many bugs they have, how frequently they write issues, what tone of voice they use, whatever.
Okay.
It's an article that probably will get some attention. Okay,
for sure.
The multi-cloud computing, you have some questions. You want to read them out loud, or you just want me to answer them?
I can, if you give me just one sec, I can read them out loud. And here we go. Okay, so multi-cloud, are the majority of GitLab customers today multi-cloud, I would assume?
I think they are. And I think most of them are in the phase where they want to get to workflow portability, where they can use the same DevOps process independent of where they are. And I think for many of our customers, that journey isn't complete yet. There are some processes that are only needed on one of the clouds, or only needed on their own cloud or private data center. So, but I think, and for some of our customers, they can use the same process independent of where they end up releasing to.
Are you hearing a lot from customers that they're struggling with multi-cloud and sort of maybe the just getting there, or the intersection of development and multi-cloud, or is this is just part of the evolution?
I think the struggle is that they've built applications that are specific to a certain cloud, and in a perfect world, they would want application portability, but it's too expensive to kind of rewrite applications to be able to deploy to multiple clouds. And it's even, there's question marks whether that's even worth it. What is clear is that they will have to use multiple clouds, so at least their processes should be portable, should be able to use the same process irrespective of where you go to. Does that answer the question? Feel free to ask for more.
Yeah, I think so. This may be too futuristic, but is there something past multi-cloud? Like, I know we're kind of on this multi-cloud journey now. Our customers are, but what do you think, putting your sort of future thinking hat on, what comes next?
Yeah. So multi-cloud has multiple layers as referenced in the article. And I think, for example, data portability, where data changes can happen in multiple clouds, is still kind of a pipe dream. I think there's, hey, if you make it a round number, there's 0% of customers is now running something like CockroachDB across multiple clouds. So I think like data portability is still very far away. I think another dimension is the clouds kind of all look the same. The three hyperclouds kind of look very similar right now, where they have kind of a broad set of functionality, compute and storage that is the same, and on some services. I think what we're going to see is that we're going to get maybe a place in between. So on one hand, you have the customer device, most likely a phone, and then you have the edge, and then you have the cloud. And you're going to have this edge, which is Cloudflare or Fastly, that have worker processes, commonly based on WASM, WebAssembly language, where you also do some compute. So depending on the latency, you're either doing the compute on the device itself, as near to the user as you can get, while not being on the user hardware. So the edge, Fastly, Cloudflare, they have hundreds of data centers, or not data centers, they have hundreds of locations where they rent only part of data centers. And then the back end for the things that need to be more centralized, but can deal with more latency. So that's going to be an interesting development. And you could even see a future where there's stuff running in the cell phone towers. Right now, there's not a lot of compute in cell phone towers, but that might change in the future. And that might give you something, not that you're going to do a lot of compute there, but at least you're running on kind of trusted infrastructure, where the device of a user is always untrusted. The user could manipulate that. The cell phone tower would be a place where you get super low latency, but you can run on trusted hardware that the user can't manipulate. So we're going to have, instead of just simple client server, we might get a few shades in between, with the CDN, the content delivery networks, getting more intelligent, and then maybe even the cell phone towers.
Is that all? Just to go down this road for a sec, only because this is so interesting. So how much do you think 5G is going to get us to what you're talking about? And sort of, because I know, it's sort of in some ways the holy grail for IoT, but just curious.
Yeah. The interesting thing is right now that with 5G is that it seems that the best applications, or the most speed you gain is with direct line of sight, which is interesting, which would mean we have to have a bunch more antennas. But also one of the interesting things is 5G doesn't just improve the download speeds and the upload speeds, but it also greatly reduces latency compared to 4G. And that might be as big of a contribution as the speeds, the capacity that it improves. And I'm really encouraged that, for example, cloud gaming is now becoming a thing where the latency on kind of fiber connections, cable connections is getting low enough that you could have the compute gaming being offloaded. I think that makes 5G might enable that for mobile. And for sure, 5G might replace wired connections, where there's going to be a few uplinks from the cell phone tower up, but you don't need to run the fiber all the way to your home. As long as you can mount an antenna on your window that has like a direct line of sight with some cell phone tower, you're basically there. So that's going to be an interesting development to see.
So when it comes, though, when we think about, sort of all of this going on, and then we think about the process of software development, concurrent DevOps, do you kind of see, is there a sweet spot where you think this is just going to all, and let's throw in maybe AI or machine learning in there too, where this is just all going to converge? I'm making you put your future hat on today. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So the question is whether concurrent DevOps will converge with what?
Well, it just sort of, as companies, as we're with the backdrop of 5G and multi-cloud and sort of the changes going on with some of the hardware, I guess what I'm wondering is, what do you see this meaning for sort of software development, concurrent DevOps today? Like, how is there are there going to have to be some sort of sweeping changes as we go forward to sort of accommodate some of these breakthrough technologies? I mean, because, again, companies are, DevOps is coming and companies are doing it, but it's also not necessarily the law of the land quite yet in software development, broadly. So just wondering.
I don't know. I think there's going to be more moving parts instead of, hey, you used to have deploy software to almost a single server, and now you're deploying it to probably multiple servers that scale up and down automatically in the cloud. And from there, it's going to go to, it's not a single cloud, but multiple clouds. From there, it's going to go to, well, it's not just those hyper clouds, it's also the CDNs and cell phone towers and everywhere else. You're already seeing that a bit with mobile, where kind of you update the software both on the client side and on the server side.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, it's no longer a single deploy, like with progressive delivery, with feature flags and CD. Features are turned on and off over time in a gradual fashion instead of these big bang deployments. Another thing I'm wondering about is how we'll deal with the managed services provided by the cloud. You see that you're doing much more. Like everything is trending to kind of integrated open source, where you can deploy an application and then specify all the dependencies as well. I wonder whether the managed services, like a database service like RDS, whether that will be controlled by open source software, and that will be something like Crossplane, which we recently had an announcement that they're now supporting GitLab, or that the managed services will be replaced by kind of Kubernetes operators that do the same thing, but then just by using the basic primitives instead of using a managed service. I'm not sure how that will play out, but I think it's interesting.
That is interesting. In the context of, I know that we just moved to Google Cloud Platform. And we did an interesting blog post about it. Curious though, from your perspective, any thoughts for GitLab customers or people reading this when they're kind of going through this sort of how do we choose, how do we move, how do we sort of manage our presence in the cloud? Anything you walked away from that experience with?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add in addition to what we already communicated.
Okay. So you talked about a bunch of multi-cloud stages, talking about, workflow and apps and DR and data portability. Are there some areas where you think right now customers can get the biggest bang for their buck when it comes to multi-cloud and taking the most advantage of what's out there?
Yeah, I think right now it's workflow portability makes a lot of sense, that all your teams are working in the same way, that you can measure results across the company, and that people can join other teams without a hassle. I think application portability, the verdict is do it as much as is needed. So if you have an application that is very essential and expensive, you can get in a better negotiation position by proving that it's portable. That might be worth the effort, but for a lot of applications, it might not be worth the effort to build them somewhere else. And in order to kind of make the best decisions for the future, when you have the option, build something on an open source technology instead of a closed source technology. For example, instead of using Amazon Kinesis, you use Amazon's Kafka offering, so that you can, if you end up having to move it to another cloud, you don't have to refactor that code.
Okay, that makes sense. Anything I should have asked you that I didn't about multi-cloud before we move on?
You had a great question, like in there, I think about GitLab, or that's how I interpreted it. It's interesting to see what we do. GitLab, we have workflow portability. We are getting close to application portability. Well, we have application portability. GitLab can run on any cloud. disaster recovery portability is harder. Like we can fail over to another cloud, but right now that takes kind of too much time to be a super feasible option. We do have workload portability, as in our CI runners can live on any cloud. But we're finding that the ingress and egress charges, so the money you pay for transferring data, kind of prohibit us from running the compute on another cloud, or like it makes us not financially viable to move them somewhere else. I found, so sometimes it's technically possible, but then it doesn't make financial sense to split the workload. I thought that was an interesting finding. That was all.
Oh, that's interesting. That is. Okay. You talked about, and this is one I'm not, I'm going to be really looking to you for guidance here. Tell me where you were headed with this whole sort of MR instead of issue first, and what's the message? Again, this may or may not be a blog. It was in that list.
Totally.
So, so yeah, what were you thinking?
Yeah. So we used to have a section in our handbook that said issue first, which recommended, hey, if you want to change something at GitLab, make an issue what you want to change, and then figure it out, make a merge request to change it. And text is very the description of the issue lended itself to multiple interpretations of the issue or the subject at hand, and also just by its nature, if you describe a problem, there's all kinds of ways to solve it. And what we found is that there was a lot of time spent on submitting different ideas. So you create an issue like this is a problem. There were all kinds of ideas submitted, and it was almost rude to say, okay, well, this is the small change we're going to make, and thanks everyone, because there were so many great ideas there that you almost felt like you had to do too much. But our values are like iteration, so making the smallest possible step. And also we have the concept of a DRI, a directly responsible individual. So just have someone make that call, and it's rude not to ask for suggestions, but it's not rude to ignore suggestions. In the end, someone has to do the work and they can decide. But a lot of things got kind of stuck. Like, yes, there was a problem. Yes, there were lots of opinions about both what the problem was and what the solutions were, but it didn't quickly result in a change. So now we're suggesting, look, if you want to make a change at GitLab, propose the change. Don't say this is the problem, this is a possible solution. Make the change, propose the change in the handbook. And that makes it much easier for people to review. It makes it much quicker, much more constrained. People are not going to come up with 500 ideas to also do something in the same realm, because it's much more, okay, is this better or worse than it used to be? And how can we make this specific thing slightly better? But it constrains the scope. And if you constrain the scope, you can go faster. And that's what we're trying to do many iterations quickly. In order to have many iterations, you need to make them very small. So that's why we're now recommending just make the proposal you want to see, and then let's review that to prevent stuff from getting stuck in an issue and not moving forward.
Actually, it's funny because that's a subject that came up in a couple of sessions I was in at Contribute, talking about this idea of simply too many ideas, and how do you deal with the volume of ideas. So that seems like that's the answer. So.
Yes. So yeah, it turns out we have enough good ideas, so we can put a bit more burden on the person suggesting it by saying, hey, just make the change you want to see.
Okay. Good. All right. Sustainability. Let's talk about this. You brought up the idea that early adopters and sort of late adopters are obviously in different places and need different things. So can you talk about, maybe start back up slightly, and how would you describe GitLab now? We an early adopter, we a late adopter, we in the middle, we're on the, where are we? And then we can, maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, GitLab is now in its adoption curve. It's at the early majority. It's no longer an early adopter.
Okay.
Thing. People are not reaching out to GitLab for the sake of trying something new. People are reaching out to GitLab because it makes a lot of sense. And they're getting the results with it. And this was based on the open source infrastructure white paper. The link is broken, but I hope we can find it somewhere else. And it basically says that open source projects have a cycle to them. And in the beginning, you have early adopters. Those tend to adopt new technology almost for the sake of adopting new technology. Mm-hmm. And they are very passionate. They are very intelligent, and they are very, I want to say self-managed, but they can figure out stuff on their own much better than others. So GitLab went through this phase and it greatly expanded. Then when you get to early majority, people are much more pragmatic. So they will more quickly ask a question without like trying to dive into the source code to find the answer themselves. They are less likely to answer other people's question. They have a job to do. They just need to get the job done. They're not here for hanging out or for the social community. So what that means is that things like answering questions from people around the product becomes harder and harder. And there's fewer people also who want to do kind of be maintainers and do code reviews and provide feedback to suggestions. And that can lead to huge problems if you have an open source project, that can lead to a big problem where there's more questions coming in and less people being able to answer them. And there's more code suggestions coming in of a slightly lower quality and fewer people who can help get them over the finish line. So in this case, it's super helpful that GitLab, apart from an open source project, also is a company. So we can have more people whose job it is who are paid to help out. Now we don't have a lot of people. We don't have enough people to kind of deal with every single question, but we do have people that are helping to triage issues. And we got MR coaches that are trying to help merge requests over the finish line. If there wasn't a company around GitLab, the odds are that these activities wouldn't be done and that the project would kind of get stale and that it wouldn't be as successful as it is now.
So I guess are you saying then that you know, it's sort of the natural evolution that as a project gets bigger and more accepted or standardized, sort of the momentum slows, then it just has to? That's just the nature of the beast?
I think for a lot of projects, a lot of very successful open source projects, they might slow down as that weight becomes bigger. It's not true for all of them. For example, Linux and Postgres are examples of projects that have, for Postgres, even accelerated. But I do think it's a common thing that happens, and I think we've been able to avoid that slowdown due to being able to pay people to work on GitLab full time.
So when you're moving toward the late adopter stage, I guess, you know, what you talked about, or the later adopted, you know, we've got staff who can help push things along. What else do you need in that stage when you've become like a Xerox or a Linux or more of a household name? What are the other pieces that need to be there?
Yeah, so I think we're still in the early majority stage, but that's later than the early adopter stage. And I think you need more people who can answer questions, and people are prepared to, for example, pay money. Like, so a lot of people pay us money because they want a support contract. You need better documentation, and the documentation needs to be more comprehensive. You need better marketing materials, not only to convince people, but also to allow people to convince their boss or their teammates how to do something. You need these merge request coaches to get stuff over the finish line. You need more maintainers. People are able to do code review, things like that. You need more compliance, like people need to have like federal compliance for the product and things like that to be able to adopt it. So those are areas in which we're making investments.
Anything that we're not doing now you think we should be doing or need to start doing as time passes?
Well, we're not answering every question. So like there's an IRC channel about GitLab and used to have a lot of questions that we didn't, that was staffed by volunteers who did a great job but didn't have the capacity to answer everything. We're not answering every issue about GitLab. Like there's still issues on our issue tracker. We just can't keep up with demand. We don't have people dedicated to like answering GitLab things on Stack Overflow, for example. So there's a lot that we're not doing. And on one hand, I'd like to do more. On the other hand, like as a company, you have to make these trade-offs. Like, is that worthwhile for the company to invest in? And probably it's never going to be that you're going to answer every last question, especially not at the size of popularity of GitLab.
Is this one of the, I hesitate to use the word downside because it's kind of strong, but is this one of the sort of unique challenges in building a business off of open source, that you've really got a lot of opinions and a lot of contribution, but that also creates kind of a good bit of work, good and bad. I mean, the good and the bad.
Yeah, I think it is one of those things, and I've seen a lot of blog posts recently by open source maintainers who were just struggling with burnout and things like that, and how they deal with that. There was a good one from the maintainer of Redis under his alias Anti-Raz, who wrote about that. And there's a couple of more open source maintainers, and some of them have been very successful and kind of said, for example, Linus Torvalds is what he calls lieutenants that help him to deal with great influx. But I've seen a lot of open source projects where there's, due to the overwhelming demand, people like step down as maintainers, and it's rudderless.
So, again, putting on your future hat, as we continue down continue on the journey more towards a later adopter, what are we going to need to be doing then? Anything that any advice or thoughts you've got?
Well, the first thing is for like maintainers to be able to dedicate all their time to what they want to dedicate it to. So when I asked Dimitri, my co-founder, his wife, like, hey, are you okay with me hiring Dimitri? And I realized that startup was a lot of work. She's like, no, it's great. I actually went down from 2 jobs to 1 job. So I'm super happy because he was already putting in the work. He just wasn't getting paid for it. So allowing people to quit the job that they're also doing to generate income is amazing. And it's been a lot more success of that. For example, Patreon has allowed Evan, the creator of Vue, to quit his job and focus on that. There's an initiative by the Linux Foundation to provide for it. And GitHub recently announced sponsors, and there's also an initiative called Gitcoin, and there's a few others to kind of allow for open source contributors to get paid. So that's a very exciting development. There's also a thing called like paying for features, where if you want a feature, you put a kind of a bounty on it, and then hope that open source that people contribute that. Initiatives like that are called things like Bounty Source. We've dabbled in that in GitLab wise, but a lot of the work is in kind of defining what something is, and then assessing the contribution, and then reviewing that and fixing that and making sure it gets in. And that's so much work that like the bounty doesn't totally capture that. So I think that's going to be less successful than kind of sponsoring people or projects.
Any advice to other companies out there, sort of not nearly as far along the journey as we are, about sort of when it comes to sustainability, things to think about?
Yeah, maybe to projects. So if you're running an open source project, give it some thought, like whether you want to build a company around this or not. If you do it in an open core model like us, like the downside is that no longer will all the code of your project be open source. So the upside is that you might be able to create a lot more due to having a business model. And with open source, it's always about like how much like value do you generate and how much value do you capture. And I think for keeping a completely open source would mean you have a very low capture rate, and therefore you need to create an enormous amount of value in order to build a substantial business around it. And with open core, you capture a bit more of the value, but you can that would enable you to kind of do a lot more than you would otherwise be able to do on a smaller, and therefore kind of generate more value. Therefore, generate more value than you would otherwise be able to do. But I think pure open source approaches are most appropriate if it's like a piece of infrastructure that every single person is going to need. Like it will become a total standard. I think as soon as it gets a bit more in the application space, where it needs an interface and everything else, it's going to have a certain market share, but not 100%. An open core model becomes a better model.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to say about this?
No, thanks.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Shadow people, you guys too. And I appreciate it. And you'll be seeing these over the next few weeks, popping up in the blog.
Awesome. And I'd be happy to review a draft. And also, if you're, feel free to Slack me for clarifications, or even hop on an article. Be happy to.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Sid. And you'll be seeing probably tomorrow my post on publishing our pitch decks, and you're sort of talking me through the fundraising. So the sort of fundraising 101. So that's just about done. So it'll be coming your way shortly.
Awesome. And this was a good use of the time. I like this format where we talk about a few and record it. This was great.
Okay, great. Thanks. You'll be good to hear, because you'll be hearing from me again.
Yeah.
Lucky you.
I'd be happy to do this every single day.
Okay. Well, that's probably, I can't quite type that fast, but I'll work on that. So thanks much, guys.
Cool. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.